Go to Uvalde, Texas. We've talked about it a little bit. The scene of May's horrific school shooting. A damning new report shows more victims may have survived if school officials and law enforcement had done their jobs properly. The report reveals school administrators, quote, tacitly condoned unsafe practices by allowing doors to be open and unlocked. That's the least of their problems, believe me. Very interesting that they tried to put that at the top of the list to disperse some of the responsibility here. The report obviously criticizing the real problem, 376 law enforcement officers who responded to the scene but did not breach the classroom for over an hour when they knew there were incoming 911 calls from kids who were dying. A hallway video shows them doing nothing. The acting chief at the time has been placed on administrative leave. Parents are understandably furious. Should all of the cops involved give up their badges, Miranda?
Look, I mean, 376 cops, I don't think you can blame them all. This was a failure of leadership. Police are a very hierarchical organisation. You would wish that there had been a kind of Dirty Harry type who raced in there by himself, but you know, there was a father of one of those children who was being held back, who was a sheriff himself. It's a tragedy, and it's you know, interesting that in the last segment we were talking about police being criticised for actually rushing in and protecting somebody and killing the perpetrator, and in this case 376 police are being criticised for not rushing in and killing the perpetrator. I know which one I would prefer, but you know, I wonder how much of the last couple of years of hostility and demonisation of cops and action men and toxic masculinity played into this. And look, I'll also point out that the fact that we have got an insecure border, a border crisis, played into this as well, because that school had about a false alarm a week coming from people smugglers, cartel people smugglers with cars full of illegal migrants careening through town, and the school had been told to go into lockdown. So I think there was some complacency that bred in there, and the whole thing was just a perfect storm of disaster and tragedy, and it just makes it so much harder for the poor families.
Yeah, and that's a good point, Juan. They were kind of suffering from bailout fatigue. You know, they get these alerts. We got one today in New York City for flash flood warnings. But if you have too many of them, you don't look at your phone when they go off. And they had so many of these, and they're very close to the U.S.-Mexico border. And when there are migrants that law enforcement are pursuing and they scatter, then, you know, they put out these alerts as though everyone's supposed to go into lockdown. And there was no way of differentiating between an active shooter and, you know, the bailout protocol. So people weren't listening to it. They weren't paying attention. Juan.
I don't buy that one bit. I mean, you know, that's like saying I live in New York City and there's lots of violent crime. Well, yeah, there is violent crime. That's not a reason then to somehow be indifferent when children are calling you from a classroom and say that there's a crazed gunman in here, come help. I mean, that's pretty direct and that's pretty clear.
But they
and
weren't
they're
able to see
standing around
that.
for more than an
alerts
hour.
that went out, yeah, no, I agree with you completely. You know, you are the guys with guns.
I don't get it. I don't say this has nothing to do
from a guy with a gun.
Come on.
I agree with you there. I'm glad
you guys want to bring in immigration like you want to just go off on immigration. It's not about immigration. It's about a complete failure for over an hour that cost so many people their lives, children.
Yes. No, I would put law enforcement at the top of the list. The bailout alerts can go second. And the locked doors, that is such nonsense. Because if you have someone who is willing to kill 9-year-old kids in cold blood, 19 of them, Spike, then he's going to shoot the door open. If there were a locked door at that school, the shooter would have been like, oh, well, I guess today's not the day, and turned around and gone home. It's ridiculous that they put that at the top of the list as though somehow that's a catch-all response that would have prevented the shooting.
Exactly. That the shooter was going to try to get in and shoot. That might have delayed him for a couple minutes. I want to go back to something that Miranda said. If being criticized about lack of accountability in your department leads you to not stop someone from murdering children in your community, you have the wrong job. You should get another job. I think it's very clear that in many cases, in Uvalde, in Parkland, Florida, and many others, police, we say the police are minutes away when seconds count. Sometimes they're minutes away to sit there for an hour and hold back horrified parents as they could hear gunshots. The difference between those and the other false alarms was that there was the sound of rapid gunfire. Clearly, this was not a drill. We have screenshots of police officers, security cameras showing police officers diddling around on their phones while they're hearing gunshots and smiling at the cameras. It is very clear. Government will mandate that you and your loved ones are defenseless. They will hold you back while your children are murdered. They will try to cover it up, and then they will blame you for the fact that you can legally purchase a rifle for why it happened. This had nothing to do with immigration. This had to do with bad actors in government who are held unaccountable by bad policy at every single level of government.
Yeah, and as the police were sitting there looking at their phones, you know what the parents were looking at? Text messages from their kids who were being slaughtered. That's how they knew. And they knew there were 911 calls coming, and they knew that for an hour. This was not a hostage situation. And shame on them, and I agree with the mother who said that they should all turn in their badges. All right.
Absolutely.
The panel is going to